Now we're going to focus on some of the implications of a possible takeover of this country's biggest grain handling company, Viterra. Our next guest is a farmer, and he's also a former member of the board of directors at the Canadian Wheat Board. Joining us from Saskatoon is Ian McCreary. Ian, thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
Ian, first of all, your thoughts on the takeover talk swirling around Viterra. What are the implications for you and for your community?
Well, I think the biggest implication is it's sort of fallout from the government decision last fall. This is all about changing our farm products from being products that were distinguished from the market to simply being commodities. And what we're seeing is commodity firms bidding on Viterra. And it's not clear who's going to be in yet, but it's clear that the push is to change it to a commodity.
Ian, that sounds, it'll probably strike a lot of viewers as an odd thing to say because we're talking about wheat, right? What separates Canadian wheat?
Yeah.
What makes Canadian wheat not a commodity traded like every other commodity traded elsewhere in the world?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. When the farmers took the board over in '98, we spent a considerable amount of investment to distinguish our product, to brand it as distinctly Canadian. Canadian farmers are further from the market than any other group of farmers in the world, just in the sense of getting our product to Tidewater, and we needed a business advantage to put us in competitive positions in Southeast Asia and Europe, and hopefully in the future in Africa. And in order to do that, we had to distinguish ourselves on the quality side. So people didn't think of Canadian wheat as a commodity. They thought it as a premium product. And we invested in that to make that happen.
So, Ian, if you've done that over since, as you said, 1998, so the past 14 years or so, let's assume it's got that recognition around the world. If some company does take over Viterra, does it matter to you as a farmer, as a former director of the wheat pool, of the wheat board, excuse me, whether it's Canadian or whether it's American or international?
You know, there's a couple of things there. First of all, the loss of the Canadian piece clearly is likely to mean pressure to move to much larger units, which means that Saskatchewan farmers are going to have less choices as to who they do business with. I think we'll see centralization in this marketplace as a result of this decision. There's a lot of economies to scale in a low-margin commodity business, and you can expect the number of choices Canadian farmers have to be reduced over time. I don't expect this is the last brick to fall.
Now, some people will look at Viterra as primarily an infrastructure company. How would the ownership of an infrastructure company change the perception of wheat, Canadian wheat, which you say or argue has a premium attached to it, the fact that Canadian sits in front of the word wheat? How does the infrastructure, the people who store it and ship it, change the thing in itself?
Well, what changes is the player that's doing the trading. It's a commodity firm is interested in having the capacity to originate their grain from wherever they can get it the cheapest around the world, and that's going to pressure Canadian values. There's pressure. We've seen discussions last week of trying to homogenize the Canadian and the U.S. grading systems, and all of the pressures is what we talked about, is that this administration simply didn't have a strategy to make the Canadian agriculture competitive in the long term, and changing Canadian wheat to a commodity isn't going to make us more competitive. It's going to make us less competitive.
Viterra
and this is just part of that process.
Viterra right now has about a 45% market share. I understand most analysts expect maybe that it could increase by another 5% when the monopoly of the Canadian Wheat Board ends in August, which leaves me to think there's another 50%. How powerful can the farmers be in making decisions as to who handles their grain?
Yeah, I mean, the power that the farmers had clearly got largely taken off the table by the government last fall when we lost our own grain handling, grain marketing company. And I think the pressure is going to be for the market shares to divide it based on economies of scale on the international level. I think we're a bit mistaking to look at the Canadian players right now and divide up the market share. When you look internationally, the 4 or 5 multinationals, depending upon the crop, have huge market share in every point of origin. And what was different about Canada is that we had chosen to market our grain as a farm community rather than doing it through one of the 4 multinationals. And what you're going to see is all of those players looking for an opportunity to buy infrastructure in Canada.
Ian, we're pretty much out of time. In just a word, would you support a Canadian-led takeover of Viterra?
Well, you know, in many regards, once you move to a commodity firm as you opened, you know, which group of investors own the commodity firm is not going to matter as much to farmers as how many commodity firms there are out there that we can do business with. And that's the worrying point from my perspective. Okay,
Ian, great to hear from you today. Thanks for taking the time.
Thank you very much.
That's Ian McCreary. He is a Saskatchewan farmer and former member of the Canadian Wheat Board's Board of Directors, joining us from Saskatoon.